media, and host it here at Publix. So for people watching online, Publix is a house for nonprofit and public interest media and democracy organizations. And today, we've got some really excellent speakers. But first, I think I will start with, for, maybe those of us who don't know, what does full stack actually mean? And full stack refers to the complete set of technologies and layers involved in building anything, both front end and back end. Last week, we started the series on infrastructure, so really thinking about the back end, but also now kind of thinking about influence and where that begins. So to my right, I have to my left, sorry, to your right on the online viewers, I have Sara Cooper, who is the senior product owner at Correctiv, which is a independent German newsroom, also hosted here in this building. Then we have Berjon, who does all kinds of very interesting things, but we're gonna actually start with you in a moment. And then Tina Lee, who is the editor-in-chief of Unbiased News, which is a really fascinating newsroom that includes a lot of different approaches that changes kind of different sort of narratives about who are the types of voices that we hear in journalism today. And just kicking off on influence, Robin, I know I said we'd start with you, but I noticed something really interesting in your email signature, Tina, that was a little line that says bypass the broligarchy, and then kind of directions for readers to go to different messaging platforms. Can you tell me more about what kind of decisions happen to sort of get there, and what's the strategy behind this?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of people from small newsrooms, we probably had maybe an over-reliance on access from our audience from Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Sometimes that would be something like 70% of the hits of our website, right? And then as these websites have changed their algorithms, consolidated, and also moved away from news, it has been very difficult for us to recapture that same audience, or at least from those platforms. Now, for instance, we see a lot of hits from ChatGPT and Claude, which I don't think is people coming necessarily, but maybe people asking questions that our website can answer. So we've taken the hint from other newsrooms like The Continent in Africa that uses a direct WhatsApp message when they have a new article or they have a new issue. They actually send an entire PDF of their entire magazine out, which is a really cool model. And if you haven't checked them out, you should. But we are trying to get people on Telegram, WhatsApp, and then get more people from our newsletter, because we think that just getting things directly instead of being mediated by the algorithm is maybe more effective at the moment. But we're still testing that out.
Nice. And of course, a lot of those tools depend on organizations or are made by people that actually aren't in Europe. And I know, Robin, you worked on the Eurostack project, and one of the sort of statistics that we were talking about last week was that 80% of the digital tools that we use here in Europe aren't actually made or built or are assigned the same sort of policies that we have here. But also, I remember you saying that, how this might look like actually in media.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and actually, the statistic is worse than it sounds, because if you say 80%, you might think, well, 20% is fine, right? The thing is, it's 80% of everyone most of the time, and a lot of the time, if your cloud provider, removes, then you're simply gone, even if it's only, maybe 5% of your entire stack, right? So a lot of these things are critical dependencies. And so, yes, this has been studied not just in Europe, but also in Latin America. The level of dependency across the entirety of digital infrastructure. So if we think of digital infrastructure in broad terms, not just, data centers and connectivity, but also, anything that is critical to the production of a website, of an application. So it can be like app stores and advertising, payment systems, search and social, everything that drives the ecosystem essentially. And yes, that media is extremely dependent on these systems, and these systems are not governed in a way that is media friendly most of the time. And so I'm really happy to see that the continent being emulated. I get it on Signal like regularly. It's a great model, but we need a lot more of that. Absolutely.
And Sarah, you're actually building a lot of these alternative tools. Can you tell me more about those?
Yeah, so well, I'll be modest. I don't build anything, I don't code, but I'm a product owner, which is a fancy word for a project manager for software projects. And Corrective, which like you said is right here in this building, has a special interest in trying to see how far we can push the open source model for journalism, starting inside of our newsrooms. So with the modest IT resources that we have, we spend a lot of time maintaining our own self-hosted email or calendar or file storage systems. And with the idea that not only is it more secure, we're investigative journalists, so, there's a risk there, but also trying to, kind of like lend our use cases, lend our everyday working resources to the open source ecosystem. So I think a lot of what happens with open source tools is that, no, they're not the most user friendly. They don't ship the fastest. They don't have VC funding pushing a lot of like really chic user interfaces. And so a lot of times they lack the kind of like user data that would be needed to develop a lot of these tools in a robust way. So we're trying to use them inside, and we also develop our own tools as well. I work on a project called Be a Bee, or the Crowd Newsroom, which is in self-developed open source community engagement platform where people or newsrooms, independent media, can ask questions of their audiences, manage payments, manage memberships. So trying to also affect the media ecosystem beyond just the content that we're producing.
Interesting. And how, when you're building a lot of these tools and systems, how much of it is influenced by journalistic values in a way that non-journalistic tools are built?
I think for the actual software that we build, which is coming like from the media for the media, 100%, because we're basically creating a new product with a new product market fit. So you could use Salesforce, you could use any other like CRM or HubSpot or something to manage your members. You could use Patreon. But all of those things are like not quite good enough. They're all kind of missing that thing that is perfect for small media or independent news organizations. So in that case, it really was like developing a product to fit our own needs in the own needs space. Something like email, I think that's in the other case where everybody has adapted the way that they work to the tool, and that there's just standard ways that one sends an email. Is it the best for journalists? I probably not. But this is just like you kind of, that by the time you would take to build something and then train your whole newsroom how to send a different email, like why bother, Yeah.
Fair. And this is, I think, a question for all of you. To what extent do you think journalists should be involved in the development of the tools that they use to produce their journalism?
I mean, yeah, it sounds good. I was thinking about this question before because when I started in journalism, it was like this kind of feeling that we were like hijacking social media, which was supposed to be about individual users. Like if you think about Facebook, it was for guys to scope out which hot girls are in their college or whatever. And we're like, we're going to use this to put a club on it and then a blog. And then eventually Newsroom started to use it. And as Facebook caught on to the fact that that was a really big way that people were using it, they actually gave us tools and helped us use it, right? And it's similar with Twitter and other kinds of things that they adapted to the way that people were actually using it. And newsrooms kind of learned how to hijack those tools and put them to their own needs. So I think a lot of people who started out as journalists and didn't think that they needed to know that much about tech or how to use those kinds of things, if that's what they thought. I mean, I hoped I would not have to get that good at it, which is why I went into journalism, is because I'm good with words, not with numbers. But yeah, I mean, I felt like I got, good at like hacking these things to make them useful for my own organization. And you figured out all these kinds of, you remember like the age of like Hootsuite and Buffer and things like that. So it's like, haha, we're going to like really optimize and be able to post on all these platforms. And that really worked for a while. I mean, you would really get a lot of views. You would really get a lot of clicks. And if you had a model where people pay money to you when they click because you have ads on your website, this was all really useful and it worked really well. And then I think that they realized that people leaving their websites and going to other websites was not the ideal use case that they wanted to use. And they started to make it less and less useful, and we kind of chased them down. And so now we found ourselves being experts at using tools that no longer really want us and for which they're not really designed for what we wanted to do. And they were never designed for that in the first place. But I'm not sure that for a lot of people with like my level of skills, where it's like I can do a little bit of coding, I do WordPress, and I know how to use all these different social media platforms, but I don't know that I would know how to build something new for myself.
And I think that's a great description of the problem, right? Is these platforms made it very easy for media to start using them when they saw the value, and when they stopped seeing the value, they started letting it essentially rot, right? And so that's why I think that maybe a better framing to approach the problem isn't so much designed with journalists and journalistic values, because they did that. They sent people to newsrooms. They have like huge teams. They can mobilize a team of 20 people to come see how you work and just like ask questions and like fix every single last detail. But when they stop caring, it's gone, right? And so instead of intervening only at the design stage, you really want to be involved in the governance and ownership of these platforms, right? And so part of that is open source, but part of that can also be forming collectives that can operate these systems together. And that the operation of those systems can, not everyone should learn to code. It's a job. It's pretty boring too, but a lot of the time. And so instead of that, getting together to govern these common systems that work in ways that are advantageous to the media in general. And that's starting to happen with the new social media platforms. There's talk of doing that in advertising, etc. So there's hope that something might happen.
Are there any case studies that come to mind when you're talking about these sort of new forms of governance?
I mean, not in media yet, but yes, there are examples of these systems emerging in many places. I think I can name two broad areas in which that's happening quite a fair bit. One is social media, where either people running their own Fediverse instances and governing that their way, or people building shared infrastructure for the AT protocol and using that to have like their own recommendation feeds, replacing default algorithms with one that they choose. There's a whole world of creativity happening there. It hasn't completely broken through to the mainstream, but it really has momentum and it's really happening there. And then there's another category of systems with that kind of shared governance that is happening notably in India with a system called the Berjon protocol. And it's basically commerce infrastructure that you can specialize for given markets. And so retailers can, instead of like all being serfs to Amazon, can basically run their own platform, and like anyone can access it with an open protocol. Anyone can sell on it. Same thing for ride hailing. So the same system is being used in, I don't know, India is huge. So it's like immediately like 700 cities and millions of users. It is being used to do ride hailing of taxis and replace Uber and Lyft, etc. And again, like governed by people who have a direct interest in the system operating, instead of some VC funded platform.
And do you think we should be inviting more technology organizations into newsrooms to see what we actually want? This is a this is a question to all of you. It's I'm not swaying you in either direction, but for example, there's there are a couple of different organizations, actually mostly on the sort of the front end side, who are designing tools specifically for journalists, and they are giving quite a lot of their services for free for non-profits, for example, or sponsorships or donations or educational programs or things like that. Do you feel that this is kind of a quick grab at this moment? Do you feel like there is appetite for journalists to actually be working with them from the beginning, or are you at all suspicious of these motives?
I think people are spooked, right? I mean, journalists got taught for years, we're basically being led like horses to water or whatever, like, oh, you want to do Twitter? Like, you should do it like this. You should have broadcasts. And no, actually now everyone's really into videos. And if you remember during COVID, they convinced a lot of people that the new thing was going to be these live open talks, on, what was that thing called that we all used during COVID? Like Clubhouse. Yeah. I know, but
flash in the pan.
But the whole transition to video was also sort of traumatizing too, right? And now there's this whole kind of thing where it's like, no, everyone has to have a TikTok. And to some degree, that's the job of journalism and newsrooms, is to keep up with the ways that people want to communicate. But on the other hand, I think it's gone back to making this argument that technologists were making, I think, falling on dead ears for a long time among journalists who just didn't really understand it about open source and why it was useful. Because now that the model has been destroyed for journalism, the model where, print media and also online media started with advertisements, whether it's government ads or ads for private companies. Now that is not where our revenue comes from, even remotely, and also because so many people can get a fire hose of disinformation and clickbait at all times on the internet, we can't really attract people to our websites. Like, if you even just remember the way that you used to be online, I suspect that many of you did what I did, which is visit your top 10 favorite websites. And now you maybe have 3 that you go to, and you expect to see those things through that. So we know that model has broken. So we have to have different models for media ownership, and maybe this concept of federation, these concepts of DAOs, these concepts of, holacracies, things that were floating around in the tech world a decade ago. Now they're maybe coming back around and being more interesting for journalists, but we're really late to the party.
To the question that you asked, I think you brought up Hootsuite, which I think is a really interesting example of what you're talking about, which is other parts of the technology sector, which are not the big platforms, identifying that there are industries that need to interact with these platforms in ways that make sense only to them, to how they need to build audiences or interact with their traffic, like the way that going back to Hootsuite, the way that you would need to program tweets to go out at certain times to link to articles is not the same way that an e-commerce site would be interacting with something like Twitter. So in that sense, when certain technology providers come in and want to work with media to develop tools with us, you kind of have to ask that question of, are they developing solutions for the other problems that we're also facing with technology? And in that sense, are they trying to get a little bit of dividend income from a monthly subscription that your newsroom might pay to use a premium version of their service? In which case, you kind of have to do this calculation of, do I need that traffic? Can I pay someone to do all of the steps to get that traffic, or am I going to pay this premium service? In that sense, I would demand that those kind of services are being developed in collaboration with us, because you say that you're developing it with us, I'm paying you for it. And that's kind of almost kind of a healthy relationship, I would say, between technology providers and media. It's the platforms themselves that create these problems. and a lot of times then turn around and sell us those kinds of solutions as premium subscriptions.
They bought them up, right? Like, didn't, I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly. Or who constantly move the goalposts, changing the algorithm, pivoting to video, so that whatever premium subscription you just committed a year to paying for, all of a sudden doesn't work as well, and you've got to buy another one. Which, by the way, who owns it?
it starts to feel like blackmail, right? I mean, like that's what I mean by people are spooked, is because like it's also they gave us a lot of money. Let's just be honest about that. It's not just that these platforms were useful for us and they directed money towards us. They literally gave money. Like Facebook had grants. Google had huge grants. Yep. These guys gave lots of money to people, and it was very difficult when they just turned off that spigot. We're like, oh, you don't like journalism anymore?
Like the fact-checking program by Meta to solve the problem that
they created. Yeah.
But I mean, we all bought into that. I mean, because it was money that we all needed at a time when it's like they took the money away from advertisements and then they gave it back to us in another form. And it was really hard not to fall for that. And I think everyone realized simultaneously, oh, we all fell for that. Oh my God. And now when they come back, or now it's like, oh, but now you got to look at OpenAI and it's really hard for people to trust again because it feels like it was a setup. And it was.
It was. I mean, and I think that goes to like, even the way in which you framed the question, I think is slightly problematic because you're talking about like technology companies coming into and that's exactly what Tina was describing, where it's like, oh, you know, as media organizations, we wanted to know how people consumed media, wanted to publish where they were, but actually the way it worked was very different. They came to media organizations and said like, hey, there's this cool new thing. And once they convinced you to publish there, they went to users and went like, well, look, the New York Times is there. This must be legit, right? Yeah. And so they completely used media to legitimize their new platforms and their new surfaces and all of that. And it wasn't at all like about making media efficient. It was about them developing new surfaces. And I think one thing that frustrates me with media, and it's actually why one of the reasons I eventually left the New York Times, is the entire community has almost lost the capacity to aspire. It's like you go to people and you're like, okay, let's imagine we could like reinvent social media tomorrow, or search, or what have you, whatever you want, right? What would it look like? And you get like a complete blank stare. Not from everyone, but from most people. And I would expect, people who are product owners, because you don't need to code, you just need to be a product owner to have like a product vision. I'm sure you have one, right? You have many visions of things that maybe you can't code them, but you can tell people how they should be, right? And I don't see that in media at all, or like very little, altogether too rarely. And it's not, I mean, I'm not saying it's easy, but if you start thinking like, how should this work? Like, maybe like posts shouldn't be like that. Maybe we should control comments. Maybe we should, anything like that. And developing this capacity to aspire is much more important than having technologists come in, because once you have it, you can like go find technologists who'll build it for you, right?
Do you think it's the sort of blank faces or the lack of ability to aspire a consequence of the sort of maybe just whiplash of feeling like you have to change strategy every couple of years?
It's trauma. It's absolute trauma. I mean, if a pet peeve I have with people talking about media, online journalism in particular, is people keep saying like, oh, we've never found the business model for online journalism. And if you look at how it actually works, I mean, you get 30% of tax on any sale in an app store, and then you get 35 to 80% tax on advertising. And then you have to do all this free labor to make social work, and you have to put in all this free labor for search, and then they stop linking to you because they don't care, and so you lose your traffic and all this audience you build. I mean, it's a miracle anyone can actually run one of these businesses. The online, the business model of online journalism is fine. We just need to stop people from leeching away from it. And so I think after 20 years of this, people are completely in shock. It's not just whiplash. It's just like they feel like everything they've tried has failed. And reclaiming this agency, you go into like trade associations or conferences and everyone's like, but Google makes the rules for the internet. How can we change that? And it's actually not true. Google doesn't make the rules for the internet. Google has a lot of power, but by reclaiming agency, there's many avenues through which we could rebuild in a way that would be favorable to the media.
I want to respond to that and the thing you said before, which is that both of you talked about, which is that I think a big problem that people have in imagining something new, but also in interacting with the internet the way it is now, is that the context collapse has made it impossible for us to just lever or like poke one lever. So, okay, Google doesn't make the rules of the internet, but now it's expected that in the same window where you look for your dinner recipe, you might also tab over and see some news, but also the place where you might get the dinner recipe might also be a reputable news site. And on Facebook, like you just said, it's not that they used the New York Times to make Facebook seem legit. They used it to pump it full of content so that people would never stop scrolling and always have something to read. And so the idea that when you say that, we used to get our money from advertisements in the newspaper, something that's really important to also remember is that the newspaper used to be a physical object, and you had to put down what you were doing to pick up the newspaper and read it. And now, even at the level of our phones, like you're never only looking at something that is purely controlled by us as the media makers. We're always going through some kind of intermediary. And so if you start to think, I don't know, maybe it's trauma, like you said, but it's also a little bit of like that, like, but if we do this, then you got to do this, then you got to do this, then you got to do this, and then how are people going to read it? Well, they're going to have a phone, and the phone is controlled by Apple, and then we have to be in the App Store, and then we're paying 30% tax on all purchases, and then all of a sudden you're back. It doesn't seem like there's another option. It seems like everything that we have right now is the logical consequence of the only way that it can be, given everything else that we have right now. You know what I mean?
I know very much what you mean, and I completely see the dynamic that you're describing. Right, I've lived there. I've worked in those places. I'm just saying that there are levers to change that, and so the problem is, without imagining what the alternative could be, it's even impossible to describe how to get there. And so, there's in Europe, for instance, we have very strong regulation that no one is using. And one of the reasons that no one is using is because they're afraid to break the system we have because they don't see how else it could be, right? And I've seen that a lot in privacy regulation, where you go talk to regulators and they're like, oh yeah, we know it's terrible. We know it's an absolute shit show, but we don't want to break it because like we don't, what's the alternative? And once you go to them and you go like, well, it could work this way, it could work this other way, these people over there are doing that, they start to change, to shift and to do things differently. And so for instance, at the very least in Europe, if people in media started talking to the commission, to politicians, etc., about alternatives in how it could function, then they would be bolder in like breaking the stranglehold that these companies have, and it would encourage them to also support initiatives like the Eurostack, like many of the other things like that, to build alternative infrastructure that is not locked down in the way that you've just described, which is, I agree, entirely correct.
I just want to say, like, I think that the thing we're talking about, the spooked and the trauma, is actually to some degree also that, like, there's a recognition that there was a big moral failure and an ethical failure. And to dream up new ethical ways to use tech, I think there's this fear like, but we all thought the way that we were using the tech before was going to be ethical. And what did we do? We got a bunch of billionaire sex pests as much money as they possibly could get. And some of them became presidents of different countries because we amplified right-wing narratives over and over again because we were trying to play into the algorithm. And we all thought we were doing the right thing, or some people did. I mean, some people definitely knew that they were doing the wrong thing and definitely did that intentionally. But I think a lot of people really felt at the beginning, it's like, Sheryl Sandberg, lean in. Like, these are good platforms. They help connect the world. Some people are going to be too young to remember a time now when actually like Facebook and Twitter felt like amazing, like liberating places to be and very exciting places to be, where you were, inspired constantly and learning about new things that you never had any idea and any dream that you could possibly connect to, and meeting people from all over the world. It was like amazing. And then we all felt that was like very enticing. And I think that there's sort of a feeling that, yeah, that not only were we tricked, but that we kind of failed in our mission and ethics and our idea as journalists to be like critical and to analyze these things carefully and to look at the downsides and to weigh them. And there certainly were always people along the way that were doing that, but plenty of us didn't. And I think that there's a fear that we're going to open more doors and we don't know what's behind them. And I see that now happening with AI, that when people talk about the different designs for AI, just as a little detour, there was a guy that was selling me on this project. I'm sure like it exists now, where you could get a front page like The Guardian or something. But if you wanted to hear it in the style of Fox News, you could ask your AI and it would have it written for you in the style of Fox News. So you would get the information from a source that you trust, but it would be in the style that you like. And you start to wonder, what are the ethics of something like that, where everyone is getting news like, tell it to me like my little brother talks, tell it to me like Tucker Carlson, like that has some ethical conundrums in it too, like the personalization of all these things, the possibilities that AI has. I think that people feel like we're not even we don't have the capacity to judge the ethical outcomes of these things, or there's a real lack of confidence. And I think that that's something that needs to be kind of built back if we're going to be like the ones that create new tech tools, is that instead of having the billionaire sex pest do it and then we sign on to it, that we say like, hey, no, we are actually good enough. We have ethics and morals that dictate what we do, and we can build tools that align with those morals, and we're not going to be surprised later.
So slight disagreement on this is I don't think we need ethics. I think we need power. The ethics were there all along. And like everyone was like, oh yeah, but we're ethical, and these tech people, and I'm a tech person, so we completely failed. We failed everyone, right? But like the ethics were there all along until all of a sudden, shit, like this didn't work out that well, and because everyone thought it was like inherently ethical. We all thought that making more internet would bring more democracy. Remember that? Fun days. Yeah.
No one thinks that anymore.
But at the end of the day, right, tech ethics absolutely fucking useless because it's, knowing what's right when your only path to changing beg a powerful company for change is not really helpful. Like tech ethics for yourself, like how should I use technology? How should I relate to it? Sure. But otherwise, we just need power. And that is, building infrastructure that enables governance that is, again, democratic, the old-fashioned way, right?
Well, I don't know if any of you and the audience know about the European Alternatives Project as a first. I mean, not just media; it also covers everything else. But a lot of what we're doing with the team of Full Stack Journalism, we do aspire to to different scenarios, is also to look at what alternatives there are, and understanding that we don't have. I think it's really interesting what you were both saying about, whether we have the capacity for making these ethical decisions on top of everything else that we have to do. But I'm also curious in what kinds of, I would say, networks or systems, or to use the phrase stack, that we can use as independent media that we actually share with each other, and tools and systems that have actually been built by each other. And there's few groups that can hold each other accountable better than journalists. And I just before we go to questions, would love to hear what kind of ways that you think we can imagine this without necessarily having to be technologists ourselves.
Well, I think most of the conversation has been focused on how to get traffic to our websites. I would say that once you get past that point, there's a lot of good options that most media, especially in Europe, probably are already using or on the way to using. We're dependent on things like Google Drive or Microsoft Teams in a big way, but even our content management systems, a lot of the bigger ones will be built in-house. A lot of the smaller ones will at least be self-hosted or built on open source or decentralized infrastructure. I don't know when it comes to things like the actual what of what we're making. that's where power and money would be really great, right? If we could develop our own Mid-Journey, if we could develop our own Photoshop, if we could put in a bunch of amazing AI tools that are built and maintained by all of us and free. You never have to hit a a paywall. You never have to upgrade your subscription. That'd be great, but I don't know if we're that good at building technology that we could ever hope to overcome something like a Photoshop. Mistral is trying, at least that's European, an AI service. But if you look at what's coming next and what are the tools that journalists are going to need to be using to get their jobs done, I think it's rather about partnering up with European infrastructure or with open source infrastructure as much as we can and lobbying for joint funding or saying, yeah, we'll always use your service. Because things like, I don't know, if journalists would love to have, maybe like an earpiece that when you're in the field, it would just automatically translate anything that someone's telling you. Google Glass, why not? Go for it. But it's Google, right? Like, if we ever get to the point of building those kinds of tools, which are what we really need to develop the content at its like highest level, then I think we'll have made it. But I feel like that is just a goal that I don't see us as an industry like achieving. Or
yes, I would say yes and no. I think the way that I think it's always helpful to try to think in completely analog terms and forget technology, forget the internet, because that sort of like triggers something in our brains that makes us think it's different from the rest of the world. But like if you go back to like the era of paper for old people like me, there's media didn't build the roads, right? But they were still usable. They prevented delivery, right? Media built delivery networks together. Like often it wouldn't be one newspaper; it would be shared across multiple newspapers. I mean, the details vary per country and area, but like it often and same printing presses were often shared, right? Because they're big, they're expensive, and you don't want them owned by some kind of private interest that decide to not publish you because you had the wrong article today. So these things were perceived as infrastructure that had to be independent and that was technologically advanced for the time. I mean, printing presses were like very technologically advanced all the way until we stopped using them for the most part. And I think that's still possible. So you mentioned AI, for instance. There's an ongoing project called the Public AI Network that's all about developing public infrastructure for AI to do pre-training and to coordinate existing, etc. These things are absolutely possible, and it might not be media organization going it alone because after 20 years of pain, they don't have the resources. But there's a lot of people out there who would support that, right? So I think thinking in terms of infrastructure, of building a system that we can own and govern, there's a lot of support out there, and alliances between media organizations and technologists and funders who want to change that are eminently possible in this political moment. I really encourage you to do it.
I think my fantasies are very realistic and practical. And they have to do with what freelancers could have access to. Because one of the things that's a big problem, for example, in my newsroom, so we use all open source tools amongst ourselves. We're on Mattermost. We use Drupal for communication with our network. And we have Nextcloud for all storage and things like that. So we're already like doing What I would love is to be able, when I have a freelancer come in, that I can give them access to JSTOR and that they can use it as long as they're working with us, even if it's 6 months. I would love that they could use, like, if I had like a Netflix password that I could share with them and I could do that for JSTOR and Otter or for other tools. Similarly, I think me and other newsrooms share the problem that if we want to host something on our WordPress.org site, we don't necessarily have the storage space to post big videos and big audio files, and we end up having to upload them to things like YouTube. If me and 5 other newsrooms could come together and we could say, like, we're going to buy a server space that we can use to share those kinds of things together, that would be really useful, again, to make sure that we're not feeding the freaking algorithm, but that we have somewhere that we can host things ourselves. But also that means that later, when YouTube decides to take it down because it goes against, certain presidents' things, we also see that there's a lot of people who have experienced over the last couple of years, and again, this is a really big problem with freelancers, that their news organization got bought up and everything was erased from the archive or sold off, sometimes nefariously, sometimes just because people ran out of money. Why couldn't those things be on the blockchain? Why couldn't we have some kind of instance where we can make sure that people have access to all their stuff? And then the final thing that is a really big, crucial, non-tech thing that is a major problem for most journalists all over the world is not having insurance when you're a freelancer. And there must be some solution that we can come up for these things. Like, this seems like this should have been solved years ago. So, yeah, I think that my kind of freelancer fantasies, that those are the things I'm looking for as a possibility to develop.
No, absolutely. And I think that as freelancers, freelance journalists will end up having to actually learn over and over again a whole suite of tools for every single different organization that they work with, and actually probably already have quite good insight into it. I have a question around, we've talked a lot about the sort of shifting over and especially if media organizations have been bought and things like that. We also talked a little bit last week about link rot, and we've talked a lot already about the back end and sort of Robin, I know you sort of mentioned power and money, and obviously we can talk about interfaces and who influences those, but just to move a little bit to the sort of front end, how can we do better in terms of the fragmentation of every single time we're switching over or changing tools, or someone wants to ban TikTok for a couple of days? How do we continue reaching different audiences, and what are kind of some great case studies for that? I know you mentioned the continent, but
direct to
I mean, for you, maybe we'll start with you, and obviously you ran the My Country Talks project with its own system and found an audience there to actually talk to each other.
Yeah, the project that you're referencing was a dialogue project started by Zeit Online, which is a German newspaper, but run all over the world in collaboration with many different news networks. And it was the way that we got the majority of our participants was through people who were actually on site reading articles, because we had our sign up form embedded natively inside of those articles. So once you get traffic onto your website, then you can, leverage that traffic and, get people to sign up for newsletters, get people to join your Signal communities or your Discord or whatever. And I think that's a really good a good first step, is just trying to do whatever you can to own any piece of contact information of any part of your audience, even if it's in disparate databases, as long as those databases belong to you or can be exported to your file storage system, and they have any kind of contact information for a real person. That's a really good place to start, which sounds really basic. But when you think about how many of those things you have as the average media organization, it's a small percent of your traffic, because people can come and go on our websites without leaving any trace of who they are, which is great because anonymity and privacy, and we're providing a public good, and maybe we should then be funded like it's a public good, whatever. But like the fact of the matter is that this anonymity comes with the cost of our business models. And so anything that you can do to encourage your readers, who are probably loyal to you for some reason, to just give any little bit of their contact data, not personally identifiable data, contact data, so that when TikTok goes down, you don't lose contact to all of those people who you had in your audience because they followed you on some other platform that's so ephemeral, it means nothing, If it's not an email address in a spreadsheet on your desktop, it can go away at any time. And trying to convert those people to give you any little bit of, here's who I am, here's how you can find me when this platform goes away, is a really good first step.
Yeah, I mean, with that in mind, that's exactly the kind of reason why I'm very excited about all the development that's happening around the AT protocol. And not to get too technical, but like what's really interesting with that specific protocol is that if you develop a following on one of the platforms that uses it, like Blue Sky, for instance, and for whatever reason they decide to be or they are censored, or they decide to be evil or whatever, you actually keep all of your content, all of your followers, all of your contacts, everything is still yours at the end of the day, and you can move it somewhere else. And you can even move it. So for instance, a lot of people might be familiar with Blue Sky as a microblogging platform. The underlying protocol is good for like any kind of social media format. And so there's one of the reasons I'm here in Berlin is to meet with the Flashes team, who are building something that's similar to Instagram on the same protocol. And one of the things that's really interesting with the Flashes experience, when you open it, the first time you sign up, if you already have a Blue Sky account, you just sign up with that, and you already have all your followers, and you already have the content that those people are posting there. And so that means that this could be the last social media system that you switch to, because no matter what products live and die on top of it, you keep everything. And that is something that we can develop not just in social media, but across everything. And I think that's a very exciting development. It's pretty recent.
A little bit like how we used to take our RSS feeds to different.
Yeah, or a bit like it used to be that when you changed phone operators, you had to change your phone number, but now we have number portability, and it's actually pretty nice.
Cards even better. Right?
Yes.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
I think that connects a little bit to the thing. For some reason, I'm like focused on influencers at the moment as something, because I think that that's like a key to something. We are seeing in a lot of places where mainstream media has been to some degree captured. I think in Germany, you could also say that to some degree, that there have been certain topics like the Israel and Gaza war that you're just not getting any news from mainstream media at all that's reliable. And influencers have a lot of ways, like people that I think are considered influencers have stepped into that role of giving media. So I think that there's a lot of people that kind of look down on people who build their platforms independently on places like YouTube or Twitter or TikTok or whatever. And we should be trying to grasp those people into the journalism field, recognizing that they have a talent for storytelling, or that they have a specific audience who views them as authentic. And when there's so little trust in mainstream media, those are exactly the kinds of people that we need to kind of bring into the fold and stop this like division between the two of them. And I think that's something where someone could bring their followers and maybe like, freelance for your platform, but also bring their followers there for that story, like collaborate with you and work on a piece, and then be able to still retain their own thing. Because again, because these models have collapsed of money, it's also not the case like in the really good old days when you could write an article and make enough money for a year from writing one article that was really good. I mean, there were people I meet that are like 6 years old who still do that, but it's not really something most freelancers can identify with. So they're being asked to do a very difficult task, which is that they need to kind of be their own content producers. They need to be, their own cameraman, their own sound man, their own content writers. Like they're doing whole newsrooms worth of work on themselves. And then they're rewarded with some kind of, in some cases, meager income from that. And we're kind of trying to catch up with them, which is crazy. Instead, we should be working together, and it shouldn't be a division between journalists and content producers. It should be understood that if they're also doing journalism, then they can also be journalists, and that's not like just because you're on TikTok instead of the New York Times, it doesn't mean you're not a journalist.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's very much in the kinds of ways that people come into journalism, which is an entire other topic, which I'd love to get into. However, I do want to leave some time for questions. Does anyone have any?
Heard you mention emails right at the end there, and I was wondering, does that count as your full stack if you're still reliant on Gmail and other servers? But that's more of a technical question. I wonder, do you think that newsletters are a kind of way around this reliance on social media platforms, or is that opening up a whole other bag of problems?
Well, emails is just a address for someone's online house, basically. Like you could have any email provider, and the nice thing about email is that the address goes wherever you need to go. And the same way that you can reach people wherever, with whatever email service they prefer. There's a lot of different options to send an email that could also meet your ethics and do what you prefer. So I find that a very nice compromise to get people to let people still use the space and the device and the technology that they prefer, while you also get to use the space and the technology and the device that you prefer as a media maker. And I think that's why a lot of independent media right now are going to newsletters. It's like the next thing because they can be monetized. They're direct. You own your audience. You can send as many or as few as you want. And the email protocol is mostly independent from big platforms. It won't go away the same way that Facebook could go away. If Gmail goes away, email still exists, right?
Well, we were really screwed by newsletters, I have to say. Like there was a Twitter newsletter for a while that was gangbusters. It went so well. It went like directly to all the people that follow you on Twitter, so you immediately had followers. Then it disappeared from one to the next, and they took all of the email archive with it. That was an example of one of these situations. Also, MailChimp, which is like $150 a month or something like that if you have over 5,000 subscribers, is really difficult to use, and they get hacked a lot.
Out.
And
And they've been bought
Substack
out.
is also not the solution
Don't do
So I mean,
either.
even if on their side, when they're getting the emails, it's good. If from your side, you're still dealing with one of these platforms that's owned by some billionaire oligarch who changes things or shuts things down and blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, I think that would be really great to build an own email thing that we could handle also the GDPR needs that we have when we're in Europe to make sure that we're also being very safe about keeping our emails. But at the moment, we haven't found a great solution for that at Unbiased the News. Newsletters are also really tricky.
I mean, plus one to what they've both said. Email is just a protocol, right? Yeah. And protocols can be captured or not captured. If Gmail went down, we'd be in trouble because I think Gmail is about 85% of all email servers. And so if they started censoring your newsletter, then you're back to square one. But that's a separate problem. That's something that needs to be solved, by regulatory intervention or something like that. In terms of a newsletter operator, you have to go to one that doesn't operate like a social media, because otherwise you're just reproducing the same dynamics. So that's what happened with Twitter. It's what will happen with Substack, right? It will happen. It's not if, it's when. It's a Nazi platform, and they will just like take the stuff and disintermediate you as much as they can, right? And so essentially, there are email providers that are probably better than MailChimp, and that could work. Yeah, that could work for media with media, but I think again at the end of the day, it's either media governed or someone has a way of keeping you hostage.
I would just say it's also the most malleable, the most customizable way to reach somebody with something. You produce a podcast. How are you going to tell people that you produced the podcast? You can put it on social media, you can put it on your website, you can send them an email. Or the same thing works if you build a really big following on Discord or on Discourse, which is like an open source alternative to Discord. Whatever it is, it's just that you can produce a lot of really amazing content, but the minute that you go to amplify it to someone, if the channel to amplify it is gone or is turned against you, you realize really quickly how alone you are making all of this stuff. And forget the grants that are expecting you to deliver data about what you produced, and forget the ad revenue. We're supposed to be producing information that helps people live and work and vote better. And then you're like, I produced this 10-part series and it took me all year, and then you can't send it to anybody because all of a sudden the channel that you were going to send it on has changed or has disappeared. So it doesn't have to be email, but we should all be thinking about where we're going to find our audience. And when it grows, how are we going to make sure that we have that information?
And to that point, I think really thinking in terms of capture resistance. It's like what I'm building now is captured by all these actors who might be friendly now, but who have reserve power to become hostile later. And so really thinking in these, it's almost like a cybersecurity exercise, right? It's like they could hack you in a sense from the power they have. And I really encourage people to develop that kind of mentality, because otherwise you're building on quicksand.
Yeah, I think that's the bottom line, is that we're in this distribution track right now, but we're not alone. That's like the rest of the internet too, right? It all got bought up and consolidated. And I think we saw this same pattern happen in the media already before, not in every country, but in plenty of countries, where what started out as a very diverse media ecosystem with lots of different small and big parts got slowly bought up and sucked into one big thing. And those things became kind of rental landlords for a lot of other small ones, when before some of us owned our own houses. So we're in that situation like everybody else, but the same people that are working on how to free up the rest of the internet for that should be able to find distribution angles for us too.
Yes.
Or we find them with them and we build it. That's the whole point of this, right?
Collaborate.
Yeah.
Well, that answers my last question. No, I mean, at least on our side, as the Full Stack Journalism team, one of the things that we have been building is a peer-reviewed database of all these tools that isn't just, okay, what do people think about them, but it's also, which newsrooms are using them, what is the cost, what is the sort of onboarding process, things like that. So we can also, have these kinds of recommendations for each other. So that's one of the sort of main, if we had a magic wand to fix some of these problems, that's one of our current solutions, and we're trying to build a few more. But if you had one thing to end on, what would that be? One piece of advice.
The small guys have got to band together, I think, in terms of also being more capture resistance, because the people that are in places that are too big to fail, those are the guys that have the least kind of ability to be creative and flexible and to collaborate as much. And we've seen that even when it comes to the kinds of journalism that they're able to do. It's less easy to work with these bigger newsrooms because of the fact that they have so many other interests at stake that they cannot collaborate as easily. So the small guys should band together, and we should come up with these kind of tools ourselves.
Yeah, and I think it shouldn't just be banding together in media, but also with other parts of the ecosystem. I mean, as you were saying, like we're all very much all in this together. Working on the Eurostack, talking to people all across Europe in tech, in policy, in media, etc. Like, people are not connected, and so we need to figure out a way of bringing together. I don't know if it's a movement or whatever, but at least making people understand that they're not alone in this, and that a lot of people are trying multiple angles in trying to map a path and map a way out of this current predicament, because we would all like to have a democracy, apparently, in the coming years, and we're even seeing very broad political alignment. If you remove the far right, in the European Parliament, we're seeing these weird things where the center right and the Greens and the left are all aligned on some topics. And you're okay, because people are saying well, it would be nice to have a democracy and to disagree in 10 years from now. So yeah, I would really encourage people to find outside of your sphere other folks to collaborate with, because there's a way out of this, but we just need to work on it together.
I would say, I don't want to tell everybody to try a bunch of new tools, because that takes a lot of time. And then what if it goes away, or what if it's just some grant funded project and it loses the grant funding and you can't use it anymore? But at the same time, as media people and as journalists, we're kind of never really willing to pay for the best stuff. We don't have the money to pay for the best stuff anyway, and we're always hacking stuff together, and we always have to learn how to use that janky CMS that got coded by a freelancer 10 years ago. So if you're willing to put up with that, maybe don't be so scared by these open source softwares or things that look a little bit scary, or they don't have the nicest UI, or maybe you do have to learn to code a little bit. Maybe you have to learn what a webhook is. But once you do...
What's a webhook for the audience?
Let's learn about it right now.
It's how you can make two platforms work together, basically. If we're already willing to have all of these workarounds in our industry anyway, because of the financial constraints, because of all of the different constraints that we just talked about, you might as well learn to use that weird platform that's also open source or that has the potential to meet your ethical criteria or be around in the long run when the eventual other thing goes away or gets captured.
It's all duct tape anyway.
Yeah.
So, you know.
That's what a webhook is.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, both our speakers and audience. This has been the second episode of the Full Stack Journalism podcast, and we'll be back again in 2 weeks for the third one. Cheers.
Thank you.